Connie Schmidt, and I'm a real believer in quality and operational excellence. My mission is to help people like you build quality systems that really improve the quality of your products and give your customer a better experience so you'll be a believer too. Let's talk about ISO 9001 and documentation. What's that all about? Everyone's heard the phrase, say what you do and do what you say when talking about ISO 9001. But why do we feel like we have to say so much and document so much? There's really only 20 things that are required by the standard specifically to be documented to be compliant with ISO 9001. And that's kind of a misinterpretation by a lot of people. Most people think that that's really what it's all about, is just documentation, but that's really just not the case. And of those 20 things that it says we have to document, only a very few of them are actually sort of procedures and work instructions and the kinds of things that we traditionally think about as documentation. Most of it is really just record keeping and having proof that we did the things that we said that we were going to do. So how do we say what we're going to do without having a whole bunch of procedures and work instructions? Well, if we actually look at the requirements of ISO 9001, it really says there's only a very few things that you actually have to kind of write down from a clean sheet of paper and starting from scratch. The first thing is identifying what your quality policy is going to be. So that takes some thought by your management. You do have to create a quality policy. You have to have some objectives, and you have to identify what processes you use for both managing your business and creating your products and services. And that's really about it. Anything else that you decide to document is certainly your prerogative, but that's kind of what it says. Is just tell me what your process is, describe it in such a way that everyone within your organization can understand your processes and how they interact, and then how you make your product or service. That's really all there is to it. So some people choose to do work instructions or procedures to do that, but I really prefer something that's a lot simpler, which is just using like process flows and visual things. We can describe our processes. Actually, what is a process? A process is something with an input and an output and some stuff that happens somewhere in the middle. We might have one large process. We might have several different processes that sort of interact with one another. But what the standard says with regard to documentation is just that we describe those processes, that we identify where they have risk, and that we figure out what the expected outcome or result should be from each process and have some way of measuring that. So how might we construct a quality system that will do just that without a whole bunch of documentation? My recommendation is to use process flow diagrams, and you can get into as much or as little detail as you like. I like to ask myself, how much detail do I need to put in here to impart knowledge to people working in my organization to be able to successfully carry out the processes the way I want them to be carried out? Anything beyond that is really wasteful and unnecessary and really just creates more work in managing the quality system. You don't want more documentation than you can actually manage. If you can describe your processes, identify where there might be risk or where mistakes could be made, figure out what you want the expected outcome of each process to be, and then have a way of measuring it, that's really all the documentation you need. All the other things on the list that are inside the standard are mostly just proof and evidence that you did all the things that you're required to do by the standard. So keeping that in mind, I want you to download this free list of the actual documentation that's required by ISO 9001, and there's not that much required. I want to help companies make sure that their documentation is both lean and value added and actually helpful to their business. If you're going to be ISO 9001 compliant or certified, you want to make sure that you interpret and understand the concepts inside the standard, because the requirements in there, if they're applied properly, can really significantly impact your business in a great and positive way. If you're starting from scratch, this list will be very helpful. It'll kind of define it right for you, what's required by the standard. If you're already working with a system, it'll help you go back and have a sort of a check on, do I really need all the documents that I have? Because the requirements are, there's things listed within the standard, and then there's another thing that says, and other documentation required by the organization. So that means it's up to you to decide what other documentation you might need. Some companies say, when they undergo this ISO journey, they say, okay, everybody, the first thing we have to do is everybody has to write down everything they do. That's just not true. You don't have to do that. What is an appropriate amount of documentation are procedures, work instructions, or job aids, or these flow diagrams that I've mentioned that would be useful to impart knowledge to a person. If you're not using them as training materials, if you're not using them to describe your quality system, I have to ask why you have them, because the ISO standard does not require anything that isn't useful into actually how your business is going to run. So go get your free download today. It's got a whole list of all the requirements of ISO 9001 and the documentation that is required. Or if you'd like to work together, visit my website at www.marnieschmidt.com. And I'm just ready to launch a brand new series called ISO 9001 in plain English, where I take the entire ISO 9001 standard top to bottom and break it down into easy to understand English so that you can understand the requirements, apply them to actually leverage the power and unleash what can be in your quality system if you use the principles and concepts correctly. I want your quality system to be easy to use. I want you to be able to engage your employees, have your management support your system. I want it to be easy for you to maintain, and I want it to be powerful. I want the quality of your products to improve and your customers' experience to improve. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep improving.